Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Zoom discussion and presentation, rather, on Introduction to Stocker Cattle. This is Mary Lynn Collins. I'm coming to you from Oneida County Cooperative Extension, and I want to be sure to welcome you all to tonight's discussion. This is the second in a series of 3 beef programs that the Extension Livestock Program Work Team has worked to put together. So we thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy tonight's presentation. This will be recorded, by the way, and we'll be happy to share that link with you when it becomes available. And so tonight's presenters are Dr. Mike Baker, Beef Cattle Extension Specialist with Cornell University, as well as Jason Detzle, the Livestock Educator in Ulster County, as well as beef producer himself. So tonight's presenter up first is Mike Baker. I will stop sharing my screen and allow him to pull his presentation up. Please feel free to use the chat box to enter your questions or comments, and we'll allow time for those at the end of each presenter. I'll let someone come in out of the waiting room. With that, Mike, I'm stopping my share screen and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hey. There we go. So good evening, everybody. It's kind of nice to have these meetings via Zoom because you're in the warmth of your home and you didn't have to travel outside, and those, teens are almost single-digit weather. So that's one silver lining to the current state we're in. So what my goal tonight is just to spend about 20 minutes overviewing the stalker industry from the 50,000 foot level, if you will. And then Jason's going to follow up with his direct experience with running stalker cattle himself, so that hopefully between the two of us, you can get a good idea of what the industry is. Appreciate and welcome and encourage questions, either through the chat box, or if it needs to be during the presentation, that's fine too. Most important thing is get your questions answered. So in 2017, I received a grant from Ag and Markets to increase the awareness of stalker cattle and how it might work, specifically in the southern tier, but also statewide. We wanted to really look at the underutilized lands, grasslands in the state, but also give an opportunity for young or new farmers, beginning farmers, to get into the business of agriculture. So stalker cattle fits that definition very well. I want to take a sidebar though, and just talk some about why we do this. There's a book written by Simon Sinek called Start With Why, and it's a really good book, and I would encourage you to read it. It looks at what makes leaders successful, and I've adapted some of it to what makes stalker operators successful. One of the stories in the book is about Ernest Shackleton, and he was a captain of a ship that wanted to do something really different. And so by what I mean by why is, what's the purpose of your farm? What do you have in your gut that you really enjoy doing? That means a lot, passionate about. What is the why? Why do you do things that you do? Not the what, but the why. And once you can identify that, then you can be more successful. Some of the whys, I've just listed a few. For me in the springtime, after a long winter, turning cattle out for the first time to grass and just sitting and listening to the grazing just gives me a grazing rush, if you will. Others have talked about beating the odds. Agriculture is not always successful, but with stocker cattle, there's an opportunity to do that. And so taking an enterprise such as that and beating the odds. Making a living with beef cattle, stocker cattle has the opportunity to provide that. Rebuilding the rural economy, it's potentially a way to reduce debt, reclaiming abandoned land, and you can add to this list of what are the things that really pull your trigger, if you will. And so I started to talk about Ernest Shackleton, and the thing that's neat about him, so in 1913, he wanted to be the first explorer to go sail the Antarctic. No one had ever done that. So he raised the money, got everything put together, got a crew put together, set sail, and within a couple of weeks, the ice surrounded the ship and they were done. They couldn't move anymore. The ship was stuck in the ice. After about 10 months of being stuck and living off the ship, the ice actually crushed the ship and it sank.
Yeah, okay.
And
yeah, when you come.
So the neat thing about this is not the fact that of what happened and what he tried to do, was that in this event, nobody died. He was able to get back to land, get help, get back to the ship, and bring everybody home safely. And the reason he was able to do this, and I think this is an important thing to look at, is what his job description was when he was looking for people to be on the ship with him. This is kind of unique. His actual job description was he wanted men for hazardous journey. They're not going to get paid much. It's going to be bitter cold. There'll be long months of complete darkness. There'll be constant danger. Returning safely is doubtful. But if we succeed, honor and recognition will be your success. And so immediately he identified people that had the same goals and aspirations that he did. And because they did, that's in part why nobody died, because they weren't planning on dying, because they wanted to do the things that he wanted to do. And so if we take that kind of job description and put it into a grazing operation or stocking operation, this is what I came up with. Little to no institutional support. Nobody in the Northeast knows a whole lot about stalker cattle. We don't do a lot of that with the universities. Ag industry, ag in-service certainly doesn't know much about it. Not a huge track record for success because there's not a lot of enterprises here, so we don't have good data. Access to suitable land and cattle can be difficult. You need to be creative in doing that, but it's not easily done. The market risk can be great and profit can be doubtful. So if you go into it understanding all of this, but you've identified the things that really pull your trigger, as I said earlier, about grazing and entrepreneurship, this fulfillment of a dream can work. So that's why I say it's very important for you, no matter what enterprise, but especially as we're talking about this new enterprise called stalker cattle. And again, are you a good fit for this kind of business? So if you're going to be a good fit, we need to take advantage of our local resources. And any of you that have heard my presentations before or watched them, you've probably seen this slide of a Maine logger. His natural resource was a moose, lots of mooses, moose eye or whatever up in Maine. And so he used him to to help pull out logs. Whether this is painted or photoshopped, I don't know, but it just kind of makes the point. So in New York and the Northeast, we're a hay and pasture region. That's what we do the best. That's what our soil and climate supports the best. And so how do we take advantage of that? Well, we take advantage of that through grazing. The other thing we have is vacant land. Now, this is not a great representation, especially here when you look at Steuben County. But if you look at most of the southern tier, these blue dots represent land that is underutilized or not utilized that was former agricultural land. So as you can see, there's a tremendous opportunity to utilize a resource that's not in work. In fact, there's been publications indicating that 2 to 3 million acres of this type of land is available is in New York. Whether it's available is another decision or another point, but it is there. Consumers, everybody knows that, especially on the East and West Coasts. And when we look at on the East Coast, we have tremendous population, and we have high income population willing to pay a premium for certain kinds of products, such as grass finished beef or naturally fed, or any type of market that we have. Looking at our markets, I mentioned them: grass finished, organic, free range, grain finished, natural, no antibiotics, no added hormones. There's just so many ways to differentiate your product, and consumers willing to pay for that it provides us a real opportunity than if you were situated in the middle of Montana, for example. So what is a stalker enterprise? Traditionally, cattle are acquired in the spring and sold in the fall. The idea is to increase the weight by grazing, which is the least expensive way to, or the most way to do that. It's a warehouse or a shock absorber for cattle. So depending on when finishers need cattle, in these grazing programs can be sped up or slowed down. Cattle feeders can buy them at lighter weights or heavier weights. So it helps to even out the supply to meet the year-round market that we have, of course, for cattle or for beef. And it's a preparation for finishing. So whether these cattle are going into a grass finished operation or a grain finished operation, it gets them ready to move into that next enterprise. We utilize unmarketable forages. So a lot of this is done on land that is not suitable, definitely not suitable for making crops, but also may not be the best for making even hay and other forages that you would sell that way. Critical to this is adding value to lightweight feeders. So we take feeder calves that, in that 3 to 550, 600 pound range. We put them together in uniform lots, increase the consistency, and give them a health program so that the next buyer, the next phase of production, gets cattle that are, again, healthy, adequate lot size, and consistent. So it helps to take, because we all know this, that in New York and actually across the US, most of our cow-calf operations are 35 or head or less. So we've got a huge range and variability of our cattle. The stalker enterprise helps to decrease that variability. The National Stalker Survey was conducted, they're finishing up one now, but the first one was done in 2008. And this is kind of a summary of the traditional stalker enterprise, about 140 days on pasture, working out or targeting a little bit less than 2 pounds a day, but also looking at multiple sets of cattle each year. And that's important because the most profitable operations don't buy calves in May and sell them in September, but they're looking at different market opportunities throughout the year. And they're not just beef breeds. There are times of the year where cull cows can make a whole lot of sense for grazing if they're cheap enough. We know the seasonality of cow prices, and so it may make some sense to buy cows when they're cheap, add weight inexpensively on grass, and then sell them at a higher point in the market. Heifer replacements, we're in a dairy state, so you'd be foolish not to look at that opportunity to graze dairy heifers. So I'm going to move a little bit to talking about difference in cow-calf and stalker operations, because most of our beef are in cow-calf operations, but there's a significant difference between the two. First, the cow-calf enterprise is a fixed cost operation, which we'll explain here in a second, whereas stalkers are margin operators. And so they buy and sell. And you probably may have heard the adage that bought right is half sold. So whether the market's high or low, good stalker operators can still make a margin within there and know how to do that. So if we look at that more specifically, the cow-calf operator buys labor, fertilizer, fuel, equipment, all fixed kind of costs, and they sell calves. Well, the bulk of the costs are not linked directly to the sales. So if fertilizer prices go up, or fuel prices go up, or equipment costs go up, that really doesn't increase the cost of the calves that you sell, or increase the value of the calves you sell. On the flip side, stalkers and feeders, they buy cattle, feed, etc., but they sell cattle, and the bulk of the costs are linked to the sales. So cost of the calf going into the program is a substantial part of the expense. And so buying cattle high and selling high, or buying cattle high and selling low, is the whole concept of margin. And so good stalker operators, by following markets and a bunch of other things, know how to do this correctly, those that have been successful. And the option it gives you is that, if this year you just can't figure out how to pencil a profit in stalker cattle, you don't have to buy them. With cow-calf operations, you can't get in and out. You've built up your herd, your genetics, and so on. You can't just sell off the herd in the fall and then buy a new herd in the spring. Well, you can, but it's just not as logistical. So the enterprise are the advantages. You convert extra grass to profit. The big one is minimal equipment, facilities, and cash outlay. This is where the beginning farmer comes in. You virtually need no equipment, maybe a side-by-side, or a brush hog if you want to clip pastures. Facilities, you don't need buildings for the most part, and you don't have to put out a lot of cash because you can lease land, you can custom graze cattle, which reduces those costs. So it's a real opportunity for beginning operators to get into the business. Jump down here, it can be run as a part-time business while you're building it up. And then it fits in with other industries such as forestry and maple production and others such as that. But there are risks, and that's what you need to understand going into it. And I won't go over these a lot in detail, but animal health is probably one of the bigger ones, and then the purchase and sale. These calves may come in without much health management, and so you're going to have the skills in dealing with that. And you're taking a risk when you buy the cattle, hoping that they make money on the other end. There are ways to manage that, but details we're not going to go into. And I'm going to go through this. I mean, this quickly, because we could spend hours and hours talking about all of this. But that National Stalker survey that I mentioned earlier, for all of the operators that were surveyed, the most commonly cited risk management tools are focused on low-cost production. Makes sense. Most ag enterprises that way. But buying high quality cattle, we often think that the stalker operation makes the most money when they buy these off cattle and clean them up, get them healthy, and then add pounds to them. Because of the mortality and morbidity risk of unvaccinated, untreated, uncared for cattle, that really becomes insurmountable in certain times. So high quality cattle seems to help. And the other is going further up the chain, willing to retain ownership all the way through the finishing phase is an opportunity to reduce your risk. I'm going to skip that. This is a profitability slide. Of course, everybody's interested in that. If we look over the last 5 years, stalker operations have made about $120 per head. If we want to compare cow-calf to stalker, cow-calf is the green, stalker is the blue. You can see that by and large, the blue is on top of the green, which means the stalker operation is more profitable than the cow-calf operation since 2004. So important concept to understand that there is profitability in the stalker operations. One last thing that you need to know is that we do have available market news reports, which will help you in determining the current price of cattle. We can also help you do some projections based on these prices of what cattle potentially could sell for down the road. So this is just, you go to this, and these are all the sale barns, auction barns that we report. And you can see Bath is in here, which is a pretty good feeder calf sale. And then Finger Lakes is the other one that's pretty strong. So you can keep track of those sales. Cherry Creek is another good one, and see where the prices are and track those. So finally, are stock of the cattle the right fit? Are you tired of doing the whole same thing? Running cows all the time, dealing with them through the mud and the slop all winter long. Maybe it's time for a change. Do you like volatility and risk? I mean, you've got to do that. And some people really enjoy watching the markets and looking at different opportunities to make some money. And if you do, you can certainly do that with the stalker operation much more easily than you can with cow-calf. Willing to search for answers. Again, not a lot of answers are readily available in the Northeast because it's not a common enterprise. They love playing with numbers, willing to go along alone. All of these things go into it in determining if you're the right fit for the stalker enterprise. So with that, I'm going to stop share. If there's any questions, I'll certainly take them, but maybe turn it over to Jason and he can talk about what he has experienced with his farm.
Hey guys. All right. I've got two presentations. Sorry, I'm Jason Detzle. Welcome everybody. I've got two quick presentations to share. Both are a little different, and both are for kind of different levels of stalker grower. So I've done stalkers a couple times now. Mike, can you see my screen there?
Yep.
Great. I've done stalkers a couple times now, and I've learned a lot. So what I put together today was kind of a 1.0 and a 2.0 quick presentation for the beginners and the intermediates here. Anybody can be a stalker grower, anybody can be a cattleman or cattlewoman, as long as you have the drive and passion to do it. So I think anybody can get something from this. The first one here, we're just going to talk about my year 2019, what I did wrong, what I did right, and how it looked like actual running the nitty gritty of a stalker program. So I'm going to get right into this. If you got problems, or excuse me, if you got questions, you can drop them in the chat box, and we'll get to them as we can. So I'm all up for talking about things as they come up. So if you want me to stop and say something, just yell and we can get to it. So okay. So this is not a production course. I'm not going to tell you how to run stalkers. I'm going to show you what I did. That's all. All the pictures are going to be here from my place, good or bad, I think. So again, if you see something you want to know about, go ahead and ask me a question. Diamond Hill Farm is my place. It's in Columbia County, New York. It's about 111 grazing acres, 300 total. I have rented it 9 years to the day, which is incredible to me. And I didn't realize that till just sitting here. It had about 70 established acres when I first got there, and I ended up planting 40 of it, which is a whole different issue. If you look in this picture, you'll see a very nice crop of goldenrod in this front field here. I've worked very hard to get rid of some of that, and through a combination of mowing and really animal impact has helped a lot. But my farm's about 111 acres. I'm comfortable having between 50 and 75 cattle on at a time. And let me show you, there's some reasons why those numbers are the way they are. I didn't start from a farming family real quick. I was a social worker working down in Virginia. I got the farming bug. I moved up here 9 years ago yesterday. And so I started doing a multiple, what every new beginner farmer does is everything. So I had a diversified farm. And then I realized through the years I loved cattle, and that's what I've stuck with now. So I've done all the different cattle enterprises. I've come to stalkers, and now, as you will hear, I'm going to be doing a stalker / finishing operation this year, because that's what works best for me, for my time, for my resources like Mike got into, and for my risk. There's a lot going on. This year would have been a great year to be a cow-calf producer, because you'd probably have a lot of meat to sell or finisher, but it's not always that way. So this is what works for me, and I encourage you to find out what works for you. And really, I think a lot of that has to do with how much labor you want to put in. I'm not calving it now, and that saves me an innumerable amount of time. I don't live at the farm too. I should make that clear. I'm about 10 minutes away. But my total chores, even through the toughest part of summer, are only about an hour or 2 hours a day if it's really hot and I got to move a lot of water. And that's because the systems I've set up to run these stalkers and rotate them have allowed me to do that. Always keep that in the back of your mind. Mike talked a lot about what stalkers are. When I first started, I thought I could just buy them ugly and sell them pretty. That was a terrible idea. I should have listened to Mike more. You got to buy them pretty and sell them pretty, but I'll talk about that as I go along here. Basically, you get paid on how much weight you put on them, per day. You buy them for roughly the same amount you're probably going to sell them for, not too much of a difference on that margin. So the more weight you could put on, the better. And I consider these to be the race car of the cattle world. These are the ones that need the best feed, the most comfortable settings. They just want to lay down and get fat, and that's what we're trying to help them do. So every management decision I make with these animals is based on how much weight I can get on them for the cheapest amount of money. And like Mike said, we have an incredible amount of unused pasture and grasslands in this state, and that's just free for the taking. Instead of paying a lot of that, and by the way, I don't make hay anymore at my place, I buy it all in, we should be feeding that and pushing it through animals, because that's the best and most efficient usage of it, if you have a water system and fences. My overall philosophy on the ranch is the way to make money is not to spend money. So I don't own a tractor. I don't own a truck. I do have a trailer. I don't have any hay equipment. And all my machinery is custom, because I don't want to spend that much time doing it. I don't love making hay like some people do, but you know what? There's 5 men and women within 10 miles of my house that would love to sit out there on the tractor, and would even love more for me to pay them a fair wage to make my hay. And they're better at it. So I don't love it. I know someone that can do it better than me, and ultimately it's going to be cheaper. I think paying $50 for a round bale is an absolute steal when you consider the amount of nutrients that are encased in that, and the amount of value you get for it, and the amount of work it takes to create it. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about that, but I've been doing no hay and I've been not making hay for years now, and I don't think I'm going to go back anytime soon. I do miss some tractor work though. Okay, we talked about the principle of stalkers. So this picture is really interesting, because Mike, while you're sitting here real quick, how would you say the finish is on this animal right here?
Pretty good.
That's what I thought. It was the worst animal I've ever processed. And this is the reason that I started going crazy watching Mike's videos, because I thought this guy whose name was Stumpy, he was actually a very small steer that I had, was going to flesh out great. It was terrible. And what I think I learned was these animals need a certain amount of time to finish on grass. And I'm finishing on grass. Stalkers are generally only going to be fed grass too. So I thought he would be done. I was so upset. Here are my major costs of my operation. I took out a loan from the FSA. I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these things as we go along. I had to buy the cattle. I had to fix some fencing and put in a little bit of fencing. I had to put in a water system, which didn't cost me much because it's all gravity fed. The rotation's in there because it's my labor. It takes me time to go there every day. It costs me gas to drive there. And I include that in my analysis of the business, obviously. Minerals I use, and then I had to pay to sell the cattle, not only transport them, but auction fees as well. So those are my major costs. Securing loans, I'm through in the process right now with the FSA. You can't see my paper, to get another loan from them. You can only do it 7 years, but I had a great experience with Chris up in Greenwich. I'm just saying the FSA has been great to me. They've been very open and willing to help someone like myself who's a little bit mathematically challenged. And I've really enjoyed the process. And I got a micro loan, which is 50 grand. It was enough to purchase most of my cattle. So if you are having trouble securing funding, you got to go to the FSA. They understand what you're trying to do, is what I'm saying. They know about farming. They know what a stalker is, whereas your general loan officer at a bank is not going to know any of that stuff. So my costs real quick were, I borrowed 50 grand at 3.25% and it ended up being $800 something for, and I'll show, there's some charts later that show the interest rates and everything. These are some of the cattle I bought. I want to move my screen so I can look at them too. So I sourced cattle from local folks that were in the area, all different kinds. I purchased 5 separate lots from 5 different folks in my area. I paid about $600 to transport them. Again, I thought that was a pretty good deal. Some of them came from far away. And I had the philosophy at that time of buy them ugly, sell them pretty. So there's a lot of really ugly cattle in here. I will say, Mike has been promoting this for years, and I can't promote it enough, is, preconditioning cattle. If they come in healthy, it's so stressful to move and get in a vehicle. It's so stressful to be around animals you've never met, and they're sharing so many little bugs and stuff that I had coughs of the whole herd within, hours of them getting out here in May. And it's because I co-mingled them all and they weren't preconditioned. It's totally worth it, in my opinion, to buy preconditioned cattle. That doesn't mean you're not going to get any respiratory illnesses, because you very well may. But if you do, they'll be a lot shorter to figure themselves out, and they'll probably bear as it is anyway. So,
Jason.
Thanks. So that was my source of my cattle. The total I paid was 39 grand for an average of $619 per animal. Marilyn, did you have something to ask?
I was just curious if you could share with us the number of head you ended up here in these examples and your pictures here.
It's at the end, and I should how to divide 39,000 by 619. If somebody's got to write that down, I'm sorry. I usually retain between 50 and 75 at a time. So I'm quite sure it's somewhere in that number. But if anybody wants to know, just divide that number by the one. You should be able to figure it out. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. My fencing setup, I use there's 3 and 5 strand out there on my fence. And then that's my permanent fencing. I subdivide with polywire that I love. Mike, did you do that calculation?
Yes, I did. 63.
How many?
63.
All right, that sounds about right. There were more than that there total. That's what I bought in that bunch, but I'll retain other cattle from other folk too. So 3 to 5 strand wire, high tensile works great for me. As a perimeter fence, I latch onto that fence with my polywire fences for my internal moves, and I'll show you a map in a second. This is the best day of my life, and I had 8,000 bolts, with 0 problems across the fence. So I was really happy I got that day. I've used a lot of different chargers. I'm back to the orange ones now. If anyone wants to talk to me off the record, I'm happy to talk about that. My fencing cost for the year were only $700. That doesn't include the cost of the fence. That's been pushed through. I've had that fence for a long time now. So this is just my maintenance cost of that year. And it was high because I did a lot of replacing of posts and things like that. So I rotate my cattle every day, especially with stalkers. I'm getting paid to feed grass, and that's what they're going to gain on. So that's what I got. If you look on the right, here's a grazing stick, and here's, late May, early June out in my productive pastures. That orchard grass is crazy. Can't even walk through it. Here's my rotation with, the average rain we had. So it wasn't a drought year per se. It was dry in the beginning. You can see though my rotation length in May is only 22 days, and that's cruising through the whole, 100 acres or so. We're going to touch that whole place. And that's because I want to just kind of take a bite out of every piece of grass and kind of just set it back so I don't have these crazy high piles of grass to get into. Then you see by July, the rotation slowed down to 44 days, 45 days around that time. And then August, September, come October, we're not even rotating anymore. We're just kind of cleaning up the pastures. I don't want to knock them back super far. I want to leave enough residue out there to grow back nice. And if you look at this other picture here with the poop in it, that's a good residue, man. I mean, that's like May usage for me. That's a lot of trampled grass. That's a lot of pooped on and urinated on grass. And it's just, and some of it's been eaten too, but the point is it's just as valuable to me going through the animal as trampled. I consider it all the same. I don't want to see dirt is what I'm trying to avoid. That's a whole other class on your own. If you're interested in learning more about rotational grazing, CCE Ulster is hosting a 2-part series, I believe in March. That's going to be 2 days, 2 or 3 hours each in the evenings, I believe. So you're welcome. You should get on that. We're going to go over pretty much all the things you need to set up your own rotation. I charge myself for my labor. So here it is. My rotation's only taking me about 20 hours a week. I think that's probably high. I only pay myself 12 bucks an hour. So for $240 a week, and I paid someone to mow, and I can't remember why now, 475 bucks to mow a field that I just didn't like. You know, not having a tractor and not mowing very often, I do get a lot of multiflora rows, and you saw the issues I had with the goldenrod. So I don't see weeds anymore. I have a whole philosophy about this, and my philosophy now is kind of improving the land to be conducive to what I want to be out there. There is a seed, a seed bed of 40 years out there. Those things can last for 40 years. You just got to get the conditions right to let those seeds express themselves. That's why when it's a crazy drought, all this stuff seems to come out of nowhere. This foxtail, it's there, it's been there for 20 years. Now it's available to go, because that's what that seed is told to do. So anyway, the only thing I do in the winter is frost seeded. Again, if anyone wants to learn more about that, I'm happy to talk about it because it's worked very well for me. That's my rotation. 20 days in the early spring, and it gets later and later as we go on throughout the year. My water, this took me a couple years to figure out. Some of you in this have been to my place and seen what I've done. That's actually a 2,000-gallon tank. I hate this picture of me, but it's the only picture I have of the tank. So there you go. I use these Joby floats, and just, they make different kinds of these float systems. But basically, I pump up to this tank. It's about 100 feet up. It's really high up. I got to use a generator with a well jet pump. But again, that setup only cost me $1,000. Once that's filled, that gravity feeds almost the entire farm, and I'll show you a map in a second. I use 1.5-inch poly pipe into a 100-gallon stock tank for all between 75 cattle. It works fine as long as it doesn't run out. The total cost of my water setup was $1,434. I mean, that is on the cheap. I mean, that's with a bunch of that poly pipe. That tank was only a couple $100 and all the equipment. So it's a good deal. Here's how my water looks. The red line is my feeder line into my giant tank. So that's a 2-inch line. And at the bottom of that line is where my jet pump is that pumps up to the tank. All the other lines are my 1.5-inch poly pipe that runs on the ground. None of it's buried. I don't use it in the winter. This is not a winter setup. And I want to be able to fix it because it often breaks. This allows me to get almost to every part of the farm. If you follow the white line north on this map, it doesn't actually get to that tree line. That's where it's about equal in height to the tanks. That's about as far as I can go. So that back area of the farm back there ends up being a 2 or 3 or 4 day paddock for the cattle, depending on how many I have to get through all that grass. There's a lot of sheltering here for the winter. The cattle pretty much roam free of the winter. And yeah, that's about it. There's another field to the far right of the map that doesn't have water to it. And I use a trash pump to pump water to the stock tanks there when I need to go, or I'll bring them back to the other side. For those of you who are new, I know this sounds complicated, but if you have any questions about setting up your water systems, please let me know because I'm helping 2 farms actually do it right now. Miscellaneous stuff. I have a fly problem at the farm. I can't figure out why. I've had it for 10 years. I've tried everything, man. Everything. This is a typical day. This is not a crazy day for my fly problem. Every day, though, next to my water tank for these face flies, I put up this sticky tape around a 5-gallon bucket just to catch as many as I can. I've tried everything holistic, from birdhouses to chickens to all kinds of stuff to disturbing manure pads. It doesn't work well. A couple years ago, I did use tags with, insecticide in it, and it was great because it really, it's about the cattle. If they're stressed, they're losing weight, and I don't want them to be stressed from something like that. So I run typically an organic, I'm not registered, farm and holistic farm, but the cost benefit analysis of that little bit of insecticide on that animal's ear was okay with me, especially considering how much good we're doing environmentally across that farm. If you look at the grass here, this would be a typical summer day. The side that the flies are on was eaten the day before, you can see, and the other side is brand new pasture for them. So a real quick tip for the beginners too, if you have a dividing line, put your water on one side the next day and then just move the line the next day. You don't have to move the whole water. It works pretty well. Let's see. So how much did I spend on? $275 on minerals. I don't do anything fancy. There was a really interesting, respectful argument today on the sheep and goat listserv about free choice minerals and how they have not proven to be effective, or animals are not able to choose them. And I think a lot of people use the analogy of scurvy with humans. You know, we don't know that we're low in vitamin C. We're good at picking out macro problems in our bodies, but not micro. So anyway, long story short, I use the best local minerals, salt blocks that I can get from the local people. I try not to buy any of the ones that I don't know where they come from, because there's been some weird controversy with them. Okay, finally, we're through my production stuff. Oh, here we go. Here's the nitty gritty. I hired a local consolidator, AKA my friend, to ship the cattle, because he ships cattle all the time to Missouri. So if you look at the prices, here's why. The national average was 148, Missouri was 159, and New York was 125 a pound. They're not exact, but you can see that's a major difference. The shipping cost me $4,000, but I still made more money by shipping them off that 25-cent differential. And this is, Mike was talking about margins, than I would have in New York with the best stuff. New York has a lot of great cattle, especially if you want to make them look even better, but it's not really, it's really a seller's market for the most part, buyer's market, because they do run so cheap up here. And that's a million different reasons why. One of those reasons, because there's so many cattle people don't know about. If I'm really looking and hurting for animals, I just drive around and I guarantee I'll find somebody who's just got a bunch of cattle sitting on a field that they kind of forgot about. So I'm ready to pay a fair price if they look good. So here are my total costs real quick. You can see on this graph that the purchasing the cattle was by far the most. I run a really lean operation. I'm proud of this graph. I mean, the trucking was expensive, but again, like I said, we made up the differential, and I'll show you more numbers in a second. There's that mowing, the hay, some vehicle stuff. That's just me driving to the farm, water, interest rates, small tools, and insurance. That's why I didn't mention, but man, you got to have insurance if you're going to do stuff like this. My cattle get out every year, and yours will too. So just make sure you're covered for liability. Okay. So if we look at this, I lost almost $700. I'm going to get into why. There's some reasons why I lost money on this when I sold. So I drove to Missouri. I actually had 2 of them were pregnant, which is crazy because I had this one little stag that I think is who did it. So I lost money from them, and that's enough to make up that differential there with the $700. If you add my labor, it's more like $5,000. Listen, not everybody counts your labor, but I do because it's part of my work. So again, I'm going to show you some reasons why that happened, but this is pretty much the same. My labor takes up 8% and eats up the differential of the cattle in this. So again, the biggest cost was still the cattle, but the labor come in close. Here's just the actual numbers, the sale prices and stuff that I had. Again, remember some of those, I lost a couple of those cows that were pregnant, and there's some other cattle I lost too that we're going to talk about. So what went right? Here's a little fawn that the cattle were terrified of one day. I couldn't believe it. I had no escapes. I had a couple internal escapes, I think, that year, but nothing major. And the reason that is because I retained a nurse cow. I've had the same cow for 9 or 10 years now. A brown cow is her name. And she knows every nook and cranny of the farm. She knows me. She knows everything. It's really good to have at least one nurse cow or cows that are familiar with that area. Not just for when the water dumps out and they need to go somewhere weird, or there's a strange storm that kicks up and she knows where to go, but she calmed those animals down. When you bring, I mean, I only get upset. My wife tells me 2 days of the year farming, the day they come in and the day they leave. It's so stressful. The day they come in, I've realized I just got to take a couple of days off from work, bring a book, put the water out. And then what I do is I shut the water off, or I leave the water there, but when I'm not sitting there, I block it off so that cattle can't get access to that water unless I'm sitting right there. And over the course of that day, over a couple hours, my nurse cow obviously comes over a bunch. Then they start coming slowly together and get into the water, and it works really well. I had though is I didn't gain enough on grass, and I overstocked. That's what happened. I had the cattle I bought were bigger than I thought they were going to be, like 100 pounds bigger. So I paid more for them. It's not the seller's fault. I just didn't. It was both our faults. So I ran, and I had, if you remember the beginning, I planted 40 acres on top of that 70, and that was not productive land. It's probably a quarter to a half as productive, and you really can't abuse that newly ground. So that's where I really messed up in my overstocking and not gaining much weight. I only gained 0.63 pounds a day. Obviously, you can gain a pound a day like Mike was talking about. You could easily make a profit on this. I was not able to do that because I didn't gain enough weight. And there's a bunch of reasons why. Like I said, I thought I could buy them ugly and sell them really pretty. No, I couldn't. You need to get them pretty. If they're ugly, they're going to stay ugly for at least 6 to 8 weeks. That's 2 months of growing time that you're not going to get back, and they're not going to grow at all. That's what happened to me. And I overstocked. Like I said, I bought the animals that were too big, bigger than I thought, and those new not very productive. So how I would combat that next time is I'd lower my stocking rates. I think everybody should have this, but if you have cattle, you need to have a way to destock at some point if something goes wrong. Every year we get the droughts, in August, and people are feeding hay. It's way more money to feed hay than it would obviously to sell a couple cattle then. So I encourage you to find an outlet if you don't have one, whether it's through an auction or a private buyer, someone who's looking for cattle. Don't run your new pastures too hard. I did. It set me back a year. I learned a lesson. Source preconditioned cattle. Get them looking good. You lose 2 animals. I mentioned that. Sorry, I can't see this at the bottom because the pictures are in the way. But I told you I had 2 cattle that were pregnant, and then also I had 2 animals break their legs, which is just crazy. But my ground is extremely hilly. I'm on a huge hill, and there's a lot of groundhog holes. And I think that they just got their legs stuck wrong. I ended up just processing that one that broke his leg in 2019 on Monday. So he's got fat on him now. They ended up being okay, which is pretty crazy. My cattle had cough for the first 6 weeks, like I mentioned, and we had pink eye. And pink eye is terrible. I can't imagine how tough it is on a cow. So you want to treat it early because it spreads and it gets worse and worse. And we used actually got one of the little gun things with the treatment and the dart, and it worked really well. Actually, we did a couple of treatments because it was only a couple that I had to spot treat. And we'll talk a little more about that when I talk about cattle health here. But that is the end of that quick presentation before I get on to cattle health. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about right off the bat? It's a lot of info and I talk fast.
Jason, there's no questions in the chat box, but I'm curious, can you share how far from your farm did you have to source your different cattle?
That's a great question. Not far. I was able to find a bunch in Orange County, which is like an hour and a half from here. And then all the other ones, I did that thing where I drive around and find cattle. So I literally drove around, talked to my local folks, and I was able to find them. I would not buy the same cattle again, though, because I bought them. They were just not looking good. So I got them for cheap, real cheap, but they didn't recover well enough. And I think one of the cheapest ones is ones that got my cows pregnant too. So, okay.
And just one other quick question before we move on. In the chat box, Rich Tabor is curious to know, from this experience, did you ever consider using implants at any point?
I have.
Or moving forward, would you?
Yeah, I've considered it a bunch, but it would require me to buy them from an implanted source, and that hasn't just happened for me yet. And I don't think that my handling facilities are not quite adequate to really be really working on cattle. If I have to do any real work, like a prolapse or something, I have to call a vet in, and we'll cast the animal or do whatever we can. I have considered it. I haven't done it yet, but it would probably make a big difference in that 0.63 pounds a day gain, wouldn't it?
Okay.
Cool. All right.
And I'm just wondering if a couple quick questions before we move into the health concerns. And you can decide if you want to answer this one now or at the very end, but we're wondering if you could review your rotation again, questions on 20 days in the spring.
So Jeff, I can see your question. It doesn't, every farm is different. Every ranch is different. So you need to set your rate of rotation to the how much grass you have and how much land you have and how many cattle you have. It's a little bit of a juggling game. If you come sit in on that rotational grazing course, we can talk about it more, or you can email me and I'm happy to sit down and talk about it with you. I get some questions now. Average cost per pound when purchasing. I was on that. It was on that slide. Let me see here real quick. Let's see. Oh, here they are. This is what I was getting per pound. So I think back then I got $1.59 in Missouri, and they were going $1.25. And these are the ones I was selling, $1.25 in New York State. Can you guys see that? Sorry.
Was the question on the purchase price though, not the sale price?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it the purchase price, guys?
I don't know.
purchase price, I don't know exactly. They were all over the place. Some of them I paid like $1.50 for, and some of them I paid like under $1 for, or $1.10 or $1.15. The majority of them I paid well for, like $1.55 a pound, good looking. But again, they were bigger than I thought, like 75 pounds bigger. And that really set me back financially because I didn't realize that. And obviously it's harder to put more gain on a bigger animal. You know, you kind of want a smaller to gain quicker. That's the point here, the Stalkers. Okay. This is the Stalker Health. So let me share my screen here. A new stop, whoops. And we can talk about Stalker Health. So the reason I made this is because I would always freak out and get nervous when I had a problem, a medical problem. And it is scary when you're even new to a few years into cattle. Mike, can you see that screen there?
Yes.
Good, thanks guys. When you're new to cattle or even new to Stalkers, like I wasn't used to having this many health problems as I did with Stalkers. That doesn't mean you should be afraid of them, but I just wasn't ready for the severity and the intensity of sickness when I got Stalkers. Not Stalkers, it's that I commingled a bunch of unrelated cattle that were very stressed is what I did. And that's always a recipe for disaster. So I made a Stalker Health sheet, which I will send out to everybody in the follow-up email here. And it's just literally like a brochure that you can put in your glove box or your pocket. And if something's going on, and maybe you'll never look at it, maybe you will, you can just be like, okay, here's what I should probably do right now, step by step. So I organize it by symptom and treatment. We're going to go through each one real quick. The first treatment recommendation is typically the most common and easiest to do and most effective. Doesn't mean it's always going to work, but that's where you start in this process. Okay. I've talked about this a little bit, and I want to talk about it again as stress is a factor. Disease really needs two things to happen. It needs stress and it needs a vector. So if you have the vector, just like COVID, doesn't mean you're always going to get sick. But if you are stressed and have that vector come into your body, then you're going to be more likely to get sick. You can greatly reduce your chance of having sick animals if you buy good animals, but more importantly, on your property, if you have appropriate feed and water for them, if you have a stimulating and appropriate environment for them. If they have a routine, animals and people crave routines. You give it to them and they will grow. And you work with low stress techniques. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that changed my animal handling life, mainly one thing called a bud box. And it's been really great for me. And then always remember, a vet is the most qualified provider to diagnose the problem. You and the vet may not even always know what the problem is, but they've seen a lot more of issues than you. So they can typically know what's going to work, what's not going to work before you have to throw the whole kitchen sink at something. Okay. Oh yeah. Before I go to that, get a vet before you get animals. They're the person you're going to call at 3 a.m. with a broken leg or a prolapse or a stuck calf. Send them holiday cards. Be nice to them. Pay them a retainer because they're going to save your butt sometimes. I guarantee it. So my vets are the best. I love having a really personal vet. How this works real quick. Symptom is in red, possible causes are in black, and then the least to most treatment. There's a lot of really nasty pictures in here because I want you to see these. I want you to see what typical and non-typical animal behavior is. This downed animal does not look good. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Whereas this little heifer looks, I'm sure she's okay. She's just little. But the point is, you got to see your animals every day. If you don't see them every day, you're not going to know what's wrong when it goes wrong. This is one of the biggest things I see. I see, a lot of people cruising by in their truck or their tractor. Get on the ground. You're a farmer. Take a walk. Get some manure on your boots. Say hello to your animals and take a look at them. This animal in the bottom left here is really skinny. It could be worms, who knows? But if you weren't out there every day, you might not notice that. This other animal, this other cow is really fat, and that animal just calved. That animal is huge for having a calf. And I just want to point out real quick, because a lot of people don't know about gut fill. On the left side of the animal, there's usually that triangle that you can see on this other animal. Well, if that's not there, that means that animal has eaten. I notice that sometimes, especially when it's hot out. I'll notice if the animals have eaten that day, and it changes the way I'm going to move them. Up top, we have a really bad case of bloat. And again, if you didn't know your animals every day, you may not notice that. So go see them every day. Spend some time with them. They crave that routine, and they can be really good friends. They love to listen. Okay. Coughing is one you're going to see a lot. There's no pictures on here. It's a lot to take in. Don't read this. Don't try to memorize it. I'm going to send it to you. If you hear coughing, it doesn't always have to be, oh my God, I have pneumonia. Like I had a little bit of moldy hay this week and there's a couple coughs when I opened it up. No big deal. But if you're a persistent or rattly cough, or you hear a lot of them coughing, you know you got a problem. There's a few things you need to do that are prudent here, checking temperatures. There's some guidelines on here on when to treat. You need to talk to your vet about it. The worst thing you can do is just throw antibiotics at it. And sometimes the worst thing you can do is treat everybody. This is one where I can't really provide a lot of guidance because the steps are so complex and the etiology of it's so complex. We don't really know what's going on. Like if, stress is a factor or how the virus is affecting them, or even if it's bacterial. So yeah, I'm not going to get into that one because it's so complicated. But the next one I can get a little more into, and that's scours and bloody manure. So you're out there and you see some scours. Typically, you're going to see it on a calf like you see down here on the bottom right, but that's a cow with really bad scours. The one time it really happened to me that I panicked is I changed the mineral content that the cattle had, and they had really bad scours. I mean, like just fountains of manure, and scared the heck out of me. I called my vet and we talked, and that's what it ended up being. But if we look up here under possible causes, we know that coccidia could be a big one as an infection. So we got to monitor them, separate the worst animals, isolate in a sick pen. And just like a vet, I forgot to mention, you really should have a sick pen too. Those animals, not only is it good for them to get away because they won't infect others, but they're going to be dominated by the other animals. Animals don't like weakness around them. They will fight them and they will not let them eat. They will not let them drink, and then they will definitely not recover. They'll be left behind. So you need a pen. Worms could be a possible problem. You can. I haven't had a lot of worm problems personally. I've seen a couple tapeworms, but mostly I've been told not to treat that unless I can see a problem with it, or if it's a really small calf. But there are brown stomach worms you can get. So 7 counties now in New York, including Ulster, when they do open, have fecal labs now. You're welcome to use if you contact the educator. They'll have microscopes there, so you can come in and do a fecal sample if you like and see that. The reason I'm talking about this so much is because we have a severe problem with anti-worm or dewormer drugs in small ruminants, and there's no new drugs coming down the pipeline. We've accidentally used and abused those that we have, and they no longer work. So what you want to do is make sure you're treating the animals that need it instead of just blanket treating everybody, because that's how you build up resistance on your farm. The other thing, if you see diarrhea, if you see scours or watery stool, is lush pastures. If you're going from hay right on to pasture, which you never should do because you risk bloat, you're going to see a lot more running manure. We talk about this in the rotational grazing course. You can tell a lot from an animal's manure. My race car cows, I want their manure to look kind of like dairy in the summer. I want it to be full of protein, a little bit wet, and a lot of it. And that's the way, not like the opposite of what I have in the winter when I have a really high fiber diet. I mean, those like hard round poops that the cows have. So anyway, watch out if you change the minerals. If you are going to move any forage, do it over slowly. If you have to bring animals out to lush pasture, feed them hay so they fill up on hay before they go out, and do that for a couple of days so you don't have a situation where you're going to have animals bloating on really wet and proteinaceous hay or grass. Eye problems. This is one you're definitely going to see, and I mentioned this earlier. Closed eyes, leaking eyes, crusty eyes, traumatic injuries, basically are all probably going to be due to pink eye. It's terrible. It's spread by face flies. There is some evidence that possible mechanical injury plays a factor in that. And by that, I mean eating clipped hay or clipped grass. It's hard. They're still debating that, but we know for sure that some animals are more susceptible, and that the ones that are susceptible are going to get hurt when that fly lands on their eye. So if you can control your fly population, that's a great idea. And then really keep an eye on them, because I had some really bad, I had a couple of animals lose sight in one eye, and I would always cull those animals too. So again, think about treating the whole herd if more than 30% is affected. Conversation to have with your vet. But again, you're gonna see an eye problem. You gotta pick this out and be like, okay, leaky eyes. This is probably pink eye. Here's how I can start thinking about this, instead of being like, oh my God, it's a train wreck. It's not a wreck yet. This is a wreck though. Downed animals are a severe emergency. You may see this the most common. It's usually going to be in dairy for hypoglycemia, but it can happen for various other reasons. But keep an eye on any of your animals that are calving, obviously, for that. That would be a really good indication that's hypoglycemia. And then bloat too can knock them down. Like we talked about, a good way to avoid that is not just turning them out on really lush pasture. They could be injured, a leg injury, who knows, anything. Could be a snake bite, all kinds of weird things can happen. The point is you need to be out there every day to see that animal, take a look, see if it's trauma, see what's going on. And let me mention this too, while we're here, do you have a way to euthanize animals on your farm? Because you need to have one, because someday you're going to have to put one down, and it's your responsibility if that animal's suffering to do that. Obviously, I use a firearm, and I have a couple different ones. You don't need a missile launcher. You can literally use a 22 long Magnum for certain animals, not bulls. But anyway, if you want to talk more about that, let's talk about it. But you need to have a way to put an animal down that's sick and suffering. Oh, there it is right there. Limping and swollen hoofs. This is another one you're going to see a lot probably. Again, that vector system, there has to be a susceptibility, stress usually, or wet pasture, and then the vector is there. It's a bacteria. There seems to be a genetic component to this as well. But if you have a wet ground for a long time, like a really wet spring, you're going to start seeing this. And what it is, you'll see the cattle start limping. So, okay. The other thing it could be also is a foreign object. Maybe 3 years ago, I had a cow limping and I noticed it had stepped on a piece of wire, high tensile wire, and had it wrapped around its leg. I couldn't believe it. So I spent 3 hours pretending to sleep on the ground with a book. And when it got near me, I cut it off. It took a long time. So it could be traumatic. So don't forget about that. So if you have something that's dug in there, it could very well be. Luckily, this is something you could probably treat yourself with a head gate if you have a robust head gate. Also, you can use dips. I think it's zinc sulfide is what they use typically for organic growers, but keep an eye on, and again, isolate that animal if you can, because it's going to spread that bacteria all over. If you've had it in the past, then your best bet would probably also be culling aggressively for animals that are susceptible to this. If you have a growing herd that you're breeding on your site, unlike me, you can really make a big difference by playing genetics with them and really picking out the animals that fit into your environment. Same with buying animals too. If you're going to buy animals, make sure they're trying to come from stockers too. They're not, if I'm buying animals that they come on the grass, it's 600 pounds in my place and try to gain weight on grass only, I'm not going to want animals coming out of a feedlot that are just eating grain and beet pulp. You know, I want to try to match it to as much as my type of operation as I can. Cuts and bruises, I know it's a little gross and I'm sorry, but hey, you're going to see something nasty at some point, I guarantee it. Usually that looks like it was probably a horn gouge. I don't like to have horns on my place. So many people with these Scottish Highlanders, they're beautiful, but those horns scare the heck out of me. And they are really dangerous, especially watch yourself if you're in a pen or a corral, because those horns, I've seen them come right through the slats. Build better handling facilities. And this is where I'm going to talk about the bud box. For low stress handling, a lot of injuries happen in those. Just a hanging nail is enough to rip the hide of an animal. And that's going to be discounted at the auction. If it's stalkers, it's going to be discounted too. And then if you have to do treatment like stitches or follow-up care, that's going to cost you as well. I have a picture of a bud box. I do. Okay, this is a bud box. So last 2 years, I've done 75 animals in this, but it only holds a few animals at a time. I can talk more about it, but what it is it uses the cattle's natural tendencies to force them out of this exit, this chute. So there's a gate there. Everything is see-through except for that gate, which is solid. I just put a big tarp over it. So I'll bring 7 to 10 animals into this, close the gate. Then where the word one is, I stand right there. Those animals will walk around me to get away from me, around me, and then get to that gate, which is now closed, and go right into the exit, and I can trap them in there. It works great. I don't scream, I don't yell, we don't bang, we just talk to the cattle and we get it done. Yeah, we got spooky ones, it happened. Yeah, we lose them sometimes, but you know, I feel like we're always gonna lose one. That's when my neighbor with the horses comes in handy, and that's when it gets fun. But this bud box, I love it. It's portable. I can move it around. If it's too wet in one part of the farm, I can load in another area, and I just can't say enough good things about it. So if you'd like to learn more about that, let me know. And there'll probably be some BQA stuff coming up at some point too, and that's part of that. Okay, real quick, as I mentioned, fly strike. People don't realize how bad that can be. If you have a bloody wound and you leave it outside, the flies will start feeding on it, the liquid and the protein. They will spread infection on it. Do yourself a favor and get some type of coat, or not coat, some type of, you know, I'm not gonna say any brand names, but some type of antiseptic spray or something to get the smell off the cattle, to hide the protein that's there so you don't have fly strike. You don't want animals laying eggs in your animals' wounds. It's nasty, but it happens. Another one you're going to see too is erratic behavior and jumping. This cow stuck here is crazy because I've had a bull come at me and get over that no problem. So this cow probably weighed a lot more than the bull that got me. This other cow hopping over barbed wire, no problemo. They can easily jump this stuff if they're motivated, and usually they're motivated when you're loading. But also cattle jump and play and have fun. That's how they express themselves. They like do the head, you know, rub, and they rub in the dirt. That's great. If you see that, that's a good sign. I love to see my cattle running around in circles and having fun. But if you do see just one and it's acting really weird, you might have a fly problem. And it's a really nasty issue. The flies, they're biting flies, they bite their legs. There's warbles. I don't know that I've ever seen warbles up here. I used to see them down south. Mike, have you seen them up here ever? Okay.
No, I think because Ivomec's gotten so cheap, the generic form.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't see those up here as much as they did in Virginia, or I don't ever see them up here. But if you do see animals, you know, it could be something with that. So keep it in mind that you may have a fly problem with that one animal, or there's something wrong with it. I did talk about spooky animals because I do get them and they are dangerous. Get rid of them. In the rotational grazing class, I'll show you some pictures. You can see my whole herd and you can see the ones that are spooky because they're the ones that never take their eyes off me. Even when the whole herd's there with their head down eating, they're looking at me. Those are the ones that scare me because they'll do anything to get away from you and they don't act like the other animals. I had one so bad a few years ago that we ended up putting it down. I donated the meat to somebody because it was just dangerous. I didn't want this heifer around, actually, or cow around. All right, we're getting there, folks. Hair loss is another one you're definitely probably going to see your first year, especially this time of year. Why? Because stress is high on the cattle. We have a night tonight, it's going to be minus 10 degrees. No matter how much they eat, they're going to be a little bit cold, obviously. And that causes stress on them and their immune system's not as strong. And that's when lice might really start to flourish. So if you see the hair loss on their neck and shoulder region, that's typically lice and mites. Again, not all of them are going to be susceptible. There's some type of genetic component to it. So you can cull for that and you can spot treat for that, those animals. So when you do see that, come here, take a look. Let's review what it says. Oh, my mineral pan might be off, poor nutrition. You got to keep the stress off them, right? Treat affected animals, talked about products for insecticides that you want to use. And calls for susceptibility. Ring eye, or ringworm, you can see down here. Another really common thing. It can definitely discount you at the sale barn, but as far as I know, it doesn't cause any lasting damage. It usually goes away on its own over a year or so. It can transmit to humans. It is zoonotic. So if you are petting your cattle, you may one day have ringworm. It hasn't happened to me, but almost everybody else I know has got it from cattle. So you can use over-the-counter fungal medications for that to get rid of it. It's tough to control because, like I said before, the cattle's rub heads and they rub that ringworm together all the time. It's just part of their thing. Yeah, that's it about ringworm. I see it a lot of holistic and organic. A lot of organic herds considered to be healthy because they considered an immune booster, from what I understand. Fighting. I had a stag with a hidden testicle a couple of years ago. He caused me so many problems because I didn't know he was a stag until he was old enough. So I had a lane and him and all the other steers, my bull on this stag would get in there and fight and rip down my lane. It was absolute mayhem. So then the cattle were out, the lane was broken, I'm in trouble. I don't like the look of this cow in this picture. It may not be aggressive, but just the way it's looking at me, I don't like it. These animals are massive compared to you. A friend of mine had their pelvis shattered a couple of years ago down here by a bull. So you need to really be mindful of this. Castrate your animals if you're not keeping bulls. And let me just say this too. I always hear people telling me, I didn't grow up on a farm. And I always hear people telling me that there's all these differences between breeds of cattle, but I don't buy it. What I see is different. I mean, I do see crazy animals sometimes, like I said, but I don't see it between breeds. I see it within breeds. There's way more difference within a breed to me or within a herd than between breeds. And I think it all has to do with how you treat those animals. It's all a behavioral issue. Those animals have their routine. If they're comfortable and they feel living in an appropriate environment with their herd, they're not going to be aggressive. If for some reason, unless there's that weird one, like I said, there are spooky ones. So anyway, I just want to mention that because I think that certain breeds get a bad name as being more aggressive when I think they typically are just kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where people maybe treat them a little bit rougher or tougher, not appropriately, and they end up coming out a little bit tougher on the other end. So if you have a stag with a testy inside of it, you're going to need a vet to cut it out or remove it. Those animals are dangerous. Be careful. Don't mess around with a bull. And that's what I want to talk about, handling and behavior, because I think before this, I was a pediatric behaviorist. So I was a psychologist for kids, and my entire job was just talking about behavior and taking data on it. And I do a lot with the animals, and I've been able to curb a lot of animal problems just by recognizing it and working towards it. If you'd like to talk more about that, let me know. It's a pretty advanced topic. But treat your animals well, please. Poor condition. You won't know what poor condition is unless you're out there seeing your animals every day, so get out there. But poor conditions when they don't look good. These two cattle look terrible, especially this one on the bottom right. This is Yoni's. But if we have poor condition on a couple cows, we're going to go our least to most. So our most common issue is going to be inadequate nutrition. Something's going on. Are you matching the seasonal needs of that animal? Like right now, we know it's under, really cold. The animals need more hay to stay warm. They don't need a ton of protein. They need fiber to keep themselves warm as cattle this time of year. So that's why it says that 1 year steers in California can have a lot of different feed needs than a cow in Maine, and that's true. Yonis, there's no treatment, only prevention for that. I've seen it, but if it gets in your herd, you're going to have a bad time. Usually you're not going to know it until it hits you and it starts with poor condition. So the sooner you notice that body condition score being poor, the better off you are. This time of year, my animals are going to lose condition. This weather, these environments, it's natural too for them to. These animals, keeping a really fat animal all year doesn't really do it any favors. So my animals are going to come down a condition point this year, but that's okay because they're going to bounce back really hard at the green up, and that's what I'm looking for. I don't want an animal that's suffering or that can't take care of itself, but if an animal loses a little bit of weight, I'm ready for it, come February, March. What I don't want to see is a skinny animal losing hair, that's got mice and lice, because that's going to even set it back further. So it's the more you see your animals, the better idea you'll have of that. Keep yonis in mind though. If you see an animal looking this bad or with this kind of diarrhea, this kind of scours this bad, and you don't have a reason to have it, you didn't change forage, you didn't change minerals, and you got something going on, you need to deal with it like right away. More poor condition stuff can be worms as well. Again, brown stomach worms and bankrupt worms. There's a lot of different names for them. We talked about how to figure that out, selectively treating animals, ideally to talk to your vet about not just rotating dewormers, but actually doubling up on dewormers if you need it. It's not recommended for cattle yet, but for small ruminants, we're doubling, or we're using 2 different classes of dewormers now because they're so resistant to it, the dewormers, and it's really easy to do that. So have that discussion with your vet about it, about how to prevent that on your farm. Okay, we're getting there. More poor condition stuff real quick. And again, this is on a little pamphlet I'll send to you. There's no pictures in the pamphlet. It's just words front and back. But temperature stress, man, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Cattle can be cold and they can be wet, but they can't be cold and wet. That is a killer. That's why we have those North Dakota disasters that happen where we get a massive rainstorm and then freezing cold and they all die, like millions of cattle, They got to have windbreaks in the winter. The first 2 years that I had the farm, which was 9 years ago this week, today, I built massive windbreaks for the cattle. They never used it once the first 2 years because you know why? Because they knew where to go. They knew where it was better than I could figure out. So now they know their spots if it's cold, and that's where they head, down into a hollow where there's, trees around them. But they got to have windbreaks. You cannot have cattle just standing in a field in the wintertime in the wind and rain. Now they don't need shelter and they probably shouldn't have shelter. We talked a lot about coughing and pneumonia, and you put a bunch of really hot animals in a really small space, they're going to breathe out all their bad guys, and they're going to breed. Just a windbreak's good so they can be dry and not so windy on them. They must have access to shade in the summer. Everybody says this to me. Yeah, cattle don't need shade, neither do you. But you're going to be a lot better off if you have shade. You're going to spend an entire summer outside. So also too, as running stalkers and running cattle out there, we want our animals to gain as much weight as possible. So having shade behooves you to keep them better. There's actually some times where I have to make choices about water and shade on my farm, just the way it's set up. And I do what I call limit grazing, where I bring animals to one part of the farm for the first part of the morning to graze. Then I take them out of there because there's better shade for the day. I'll walk them like a half a mile. We're talking like we're leaving, we're walking at like 8 a.m. because they've already been up for 3 or 4 hours. I walk them over, then I walk them back in the afternoon to go back to their regular spot, just because I think shade is that important to them. You don't want to be moving them at 3 p.m. on that day, though. If you can't move them in the morning, just leave them be, because then they're going to get worked up and they're going to get hot and then you're going to have heat stroke. And I believe that this picture down here, is an animal having heat stroke. Now, it doesn't mean that animal's going to die right away. They're panting because they're too hot. That's their biological way to just dissipate heat. But if you see that, you need to make some changes because they shouldn't be doing that. They're not going to necessarily die, but if you keep that up over a couple of days, especially 2 days, that heat is going to accumulate and that can really hurt them. Bad, I see a lot. One thing that comes up a lot is dead animals in the water. You got to go out there, look in your water trough, whether it's just a bird that falls in or a chipmunk I have all the time. That's nasty. Get it out of there. The cattle don't want to drink dead water or water with a dead animal. Neither do you. I mean, the water can be a little muddy. I water out of a spring and it works great for me. And also make sure there's enough space for your animals to all drink within 10 minutes. On my stockers, I told you I have a 100-gallon tank and 75 cattle. Obviously, that's not adequate. What I have happen is the paddock is small enough that they come in groups of 5 to 10. If for some reason I mess up and I all have to come at once, this is what happens. The top 20% of the herd drink like crazy, feel great. The next 20% drink a little bit and get none. And the bottom 20% don't even drink because the alphas, the lead cow, take off and they can't, the low men can and women cannot be alone at that water. It's a herd mentality. So get it so they can all drink within 10 minutes and it never runs out. You start running out of water with a bunch of animals when you have problems. And then mineral and nutritional deficiencies, you should be testing your forage. Why not test your hay? It costs $20. Why not ask your hay supplier for a hay test? Because I don't think that seems fair to me. Sometimes hay can look really good and not be so good. And sometimes we don't want to be feeding the highest quality hay. When it's this cold at night, my animals, I want to have a lot more fiber. They're getting that first cut tonight just to fill up and just let that rumen do the work of keeping them warm all night. And chances are they're going to want to lay on a lot of it. So I make sure they have a place to lay down. But keeping your mineral stuff up to date too is important. The cattle need minerals. Now we know we're shortage of selenium up here. So I have selenium in my blocks, but if you're not breeding, it's not a huge deal. But make sure you got all your stuff, your bases covered in that regard. Weather-related stress real quick. These are some great wind breaks. These aren't mine, but what a good idea. They might blow over, I don't know, but I still like it. You'll see here real quick, critical temperatures. 18 degrees is the critical temperature for a dry, heavy winter coat. So my animals right now are gonna have to eat more food to stay warm tonight. But 18 is pretty low, right? That's pretty amazing. A dry winter coat normally is 32. Then you have a wet or a summer coat, their critical temperature is only 59. So if you have an animal that's wet in October with a summer coat and it's 59 degrees, they are stressed. So just keep that in mind. There's not much you can do about that other than make sure they're fed very well and they have a windbreak if they need it, if you get a really critical storm. And then in the winter like this time, the windbreak is super important. Now, here's a shade cart. A lot of folks are using these. I can't believe that they last. We'll have to talk to somebody. I'm sure they do a good job of making them, but cattle are so tough on equipment. I want to see this working. But hey, it's a possibility. I've seen all kinds of stuff people have made. Obviously, trees are your best bet because they're cheap. Maybe plant some this year. You get some good tree growth in 10 years to make a living wall or a living shade area. And you want to talk to Brett about that from Cornell, about silvopasture. He talks a lot about making standing barns, I think he calls them. That's a really cool idea to me. The animals will typically normally go into what they call, a standing tree barn. This is important too. This is just the relative humidity. I want to just, look at that for a second too, because you can see when the temperature is 86 degrees and the humidity is up, in 79, you're in that danger zone. So it doesn't have to be crazy hot to be in danger, because if you're down here at 80 degrees with super high humidity, you can get in danger zone. So just keep that in mind. That's why shade is so important. The cattle have a much tougher job, in my opinion, with the heat and the cold. They have a layer of 1/4 inch skin. The thickest skin on your body is 1/16. It's on the heel of your foot. They have a 1/4 inch of fat, a 1/4 inch of skin. They have hair with pilorectors that can stand up and trap air and keep them warm. They grow a winter coat. They have a rumen that keeps them warm. They are not humans. They are far from it. In the winter, they do mostly just fine. It's over 80 that I worry about my cattle, and I feel really bad for them. This is the end. This is also on your little cattle health thing. The cattle tips for health. And this is just dealing with health, really. Build a first aid kit. Have a vet before you get animals. Do not wait for emergency. I can't stress it enough. It's a big tenet of BQA, of beef quality assurance, and it's a super important one. Don't just give antibiotics that you have in your fridge. You got to know what kind of thing you're fighting, gram-positive, gram-negative. Is it viral? Is it bacterial? If you're not a vet, don't give drugs until you talk to one. All animals have to have ID. How do you know who's sick if you don't know who? That comes up too. I have someone when I have cow sitters, so I like to go on vacation in the summer. If something's wrong, I want to tell them who they need to treat, what they got to do. No yelling or sorting when loading. You must see your animals every day. They are stronger, but you are smarter. They're not dumb by any means. The dumbest dumbest animal on the farm is 100% me, but they are stronger than you, and you are slightly smarter, so use it. Move slow. You don't need to be running out there. You don't need to spook the animals, even when you're upset, and don't block their exit. And also, I know there's 9 here. Add your own. I couldn't think of another one. I'm sure all of you out there could think of something too that might help you out in your cattle health. Thanks. I want to show you guys real quick what the actual cattle health brochure looks like. So give me one sec. Yes. Okay. This is the little thing that I made here. It's not much. Sorry, guys. It's not much. It's just this is it. It's a cattle health reference guide. This is what I made. This is what goes in your glove box. This is what goes in your pocket. This is what I needed when I was not feeling well when I first had my stalker cattle. So we see the stress of the factory. We have the bloody manure. We have the coughing, the fighting. All that is on here for you to think about and look at. And then obviously you have all of us as resources too. That was a lot. So I'm sure there are some questions or comments or anything you guys like to talk about. I'm happy to get into. Nothing, really.
Nothing in the chat box,
That's
but
fine with me.
But very well done, both Jason and Mike. Thanks for your time. I wanted to backtrack to Mike's presentation, and I'm wondering if I misunderstood you, Mike. When you were saying getting into stockers, that some producers could put on 2 groups in a year's time. Did I misunderstand you there, or?
Well, they can stagger the groups. I think I'll give you a quote that's not mine. Dr. Darrell Peel out of Oklahoma State did a presentation for us a number of years ago on stalker cattle. And he said a producer came to him and said, you know, I buy calves in the spring and I sell them in the fall. Is that a good program? And Darrell said to him, that's a program, but it's not necessarily the best. It's just like a football team. They have several plays and they don't run the same play all the time. So depending on the circumstances. So for example, there are times when heavier cattle, even 7 weights, are a bargain compared to the 5s and 6s. And so you may just keep them on pasture for 60 days. If you turn them over, again, it's a margin business. So the trap is to not get into doing the same thing every year. So
yeah, that goes along too with what I was saying when you need to destock when you have that, you know, it goes for any class of cattle, but especially for stocker because the margins are small. You saw what I was playing with on those numbers, and there wasn't a lot. But really, if I had any advice for people running stockers, would be buy the best animals that you can afford, preconditioned. Period. And that'll make your life so much easier.
Maybe a question to share with the group, and Jason and Mike, you can both chime in here. You know, we hear this term repeatedly, preconditioned cattle. What is that conversation you could have with a potential seller as you, the buyer, wanting to know the preconditioned status of the animals you're looking at? What would those questions be for that seller?
Mike, go ahead. You're the one who taught me.
well, you know, there's a couple of vaccines that I want, or a couple of diseases that I want protection from. The first are the viral vaccines. So that's the IBR, RSV, PI3, and BBV. So that's, you know, the 4-way. So that's the most important. Then following that, there are some other bacterial diseases that are important. For stalker cattle, a pink eye vaccine probably should be included in that. So the discussion needs to be between the stalker and the veterinarian. Okay, what's the best program for your farm? And then the discussion goes back to the seller to say, this is what I would like. And I've seen it done a number of different ways. The seller will do it on his own with the expectation of getting a sale, because more and more it's getting to the point you're not getting much of a premium, you just don't get a sale. They're just not going to buy it. Or you can, as the buyer, you can provide the vaccines and have them administered that way. So and the other big thing with stalker cattle is that they're weaned. That's in a minimum weaning of 30 days. Because the last thing you want is something pulled right off the cow. And then we didn't talk much about receiving programs. That's exceptionally important, not only from the standpoint that Jason mentioned in terms of BRD, but in getting the cattle accustomed to being there. You certainly don't want to bring in a load of 50 stalkers and just open the gates and say, go at it, kids. Because
I've done that. That's not fun. It's terrifying.
Yeah, so you need to have a receiving pen that is well secured. And then I would recommend putting up a temporary polywire or whatever you're going to use to divide in the pen so that they get used to that, getting shocked and being controlled. So
that's actually a really good point, and I forgot about that. So I've actually moved away from a really restrictive pen. What I do now is I block off, I mean, a pretty large area, like maybe 50 yards each way. And then I polywire that. And then what the cattle do when I receive them is my nurse cows are out there in the middle of the field. They're just munching. And these cattle come blowing off the trailer together as a group. And they'll do like a circle. They'll see the other cows. They'll do another circle and they'll just stop. And once they see those cows kind of chilling, they'll relax. But I realize that if I give them the room to kind of do that little mosh pit thing for just a second, it's easier on my fencing. They tend not to want to rip it down. And the thing that you're mentioning, Mike, the electric fence, another thing that I do too is I put a line down the middle, but I don't attach it at the end. So the cattle could walk around the line, and I put water on that side, or I put snacks over there. So they have to either touch the line and get nailed or go around it and not.
Right. Yeah.
I have video of that process if anyone wants to see it. So.
Question in the chat box is referencing sourcing stalker cattle. So aside from our local auction barns, where would you recommend people start looking?
That is probably one of the biggest challenges to increasing the stalker enterprise in New York, is sourcing cattle. Because we don't have a lot of fall calvers. Because if you're a good cow-calf operator, your spring-born calves should not be available for stalker cattle the following spring. They should be too heavy. Now, if you're grazing, calving in late summer, then yeah, those calves will be light enough to work. What some have done is, especially those that graze large numbers, have gone to Virginia and West Virginia and Kentucky, where they have sales, a truckload lots worth of cattle, so they can buy in very uniform sets and start with them. But again, it's a margin business. So if you're going to do that, you're not going to sell them in New York, most likely, other than to say we've had a yearling sale the last couple of years and it's done well. So hopefully that'll grow. But I mentioned basis a little bit. Virginia has a much narrower basis than we do. So for example, our calf prices on average are about 25 cents less than the Midwest. Yeah. And that's for a number of reasons. Trucking's the biggest one. Lot size is another. We sell most of our cattle by 1s and 2s and 3s. And so whereas Virginia is more closer to Midwestern prices. So if you're buying them more expensive down there, you get better cattle in terms of uniformity, but then you have to be a good marketer on the other end to make sure you get it back.
Yeah. And you're going to learn. I mean, I had never used really auctions to buy and sell. It was an interesting experience. And you remember, you got to pay a commission and like boarding fees or yardage fees per day. And the folks that work at those places can tell you everything about your cattle just by looking for 1 second. They just look at them and they know, they can tell you the weight, everything about it. It's really neat. So, but also they could tell my cattle were pregnant real quick. And so I took huge discounts on those couple of pregnant ones because they preg check everybody. So in fact, to tell you how poor I am at this, on Monday, one of the cattle we slaughtered, they asked me hanging weight and I guessed 600 and it was 900. So
it's 9?
Yeah, the tractor struggled a little bit. That steer's been at the farm for 3 years, so he put on some weight. Yeah. He's a big boy. What else? Anything else, guys? Pretty quiet group.
I'm wondering too, I know the stalker phase focuses on getting them out during the grazing season. I work with a number of dairy producers here in Oneida County, a strong dairy county. Unfortunately, some are struggling. I wonder if this stalker phase might be a nice fit for some of them that are thinking of transitioning into other avenues.
Makes sense to me. I mean,
keeping in mind, our shorter grazing season, a small dairy might have, the means to continue to feed them a little longer, perhaps even finish them if they have enough inventory. So
I think it makes perfect sense to me because they have the fences. They already know cattle like the back of their hand,
Yeah.
and water systems. They have to make some adjustments, but especially too, if you can get in with a few different friends, like if you can set someone growing, someone stocking, and someone finishing, you're doing a little empire there.
I think one of the opportunities for dairy producers is also something we didn't touch on, but backgrounding. So
Yeah.
buying calves or even using their steers in the fall and keeping them over the winter. And the reason that's a good match is the dairy producers know how to make really good forage. And that's the diet we need for those growing cattle over the winter time. So that could fit very well with the skills they currently have.
Yeah.
If they have a facilities. That's the other question.
Any other questions for Jason or Mike? It's Thursday and after 8. I think we're starting to
If
lose
anybody, I can talk about farming all day. So if anybody wants to call me or email me, I'm happy to. Joe, I know you call me, so we can talk.
There is a question in the chat about Mayborn calves and how heavy they should be the following May. Well, if you think about weight per day of age, so a general good weight per day of age is about 2 pounds. So you've got a Mayborn calf, you're weaning it, say in November, so that's what, 6 months? 5 to 11, yeah, 6 months. So that's 180 days times 2 is 360 plus its birth weight. So, you're upwards of 400 pounds or so, 500 pounds at weaning. Now, depending on the diet you have over the winter time, it might only weigh 600 pounds in the spring. But given your overhead costs, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense for you to feed it that little, not meeting its nutrient requirements for growth, just so you can graze it. Now, I will say this though, when they did that National Stalker Survey, the majority of stalker cattle actually exist on farms that are also cow-calf operations. So these are farms that are calving a little bit later in the spring, June maybe, but they're planning on running those stalkers. So weaning weight is not as big a deal to them because they're going to essentially own those cattle over the backgrounding period through the winter and then also the following summer. So there's a lot of ways to put the puzzle together, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Most springborn calves, to answer your question directly, Benjamin, should be, 500 pounds. The rule of thumb is a cow at 7 months should wean a calf half her weight.
Oh, never heard that.
So if you've got a, if you've got a 1,200 pound cow, she ought to wean a calf around 600 pounds.
Huh.
At 7 months of age.
This year, speaking on the way to put things together, I'm going to run stalkers and I'm going to finish between 6 and 10 cattle this year on grass and sell those as they're going to be butchered out in October. So I used to do something too where I do follow a leader, where I put my stalkers in the front and then my cow calves in the back because I wanted them to gain the most weight, and it worked really well for me. But now, since I consider both of my classes equal, the stalker and the finishers, they're all going to be in one group. That makes sense to everybody. They're both race cars. All right. Please contact me and Mike and Marilyn if you need any help with anything. We're here for you.
We thank you for joining us tonight. You can expect a follow-up email from myself. It'll contain the link to the recorded version of this if you want to refer back to it or review it or share it with your neighbors who may have missed out on this opportunity. And if there's not any other last-minute questions, I wish to thank Mike and Jason for your time and your efforts this evening, for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you all for attending. So,
Thanks,
See you
Marilyn.
later, guys. Thank you.
You
have a
bet.
great night.
Good night, all.